400 planes vanished. 400 aircraft launched into the Pacific sky. Only a handful returned. What happened on June 19, 1944 wasn't just a battle, it was a massacre. A clash so one-sided, it rewrote the rules of air combat forever. Most people know about Pearl Harbor, but almost no one knows about the day America annihilated Japan's air arm in hours. You're about to. The Pacific sky was still dark. A faint line of orange light bled across the horizon. And beneath it, Task Force 58 prepared for war. Engines rumbled like caged beasts. Men moved across the steel decks, shadows in the pre-dawn haze. Every breath carried the smell of fuel, oil, and salt water. On that morning, June 19th, 1944, history was about to fracture. Lieutenant Commander David Harrington strapped himself into a machine unlike any he had ever flown before, the F6F Hellcat, a fighter born from lessons written in blood, forged to crush the myth of Japanese air superiority. He ran his hand along the armored frame. 650 caliber machine guns waited in its wings. A 2,000 horsepower Pratt & Whitney engine growled to life. And Harrington knew this was no ordinary fighter. This was America's answer to the Zero, and it was hungry. Beyond the carriers, the sea stretched endless and calm, but the stillness was a lie. Intelligence had warned them. The Japanese would come in force. Hundreds of aircraft, perhaps the largest strike of the Pacific War. Somewhere beyond that horizon, an enemy formation was gathering, convinced it could break the American fleet. They had no idea, because in just a few hours, the balance of air power would tilt forever. The invincible Zero, once the terror of Pearl Harbor, Wake Island, and the Coral Sea, was about to meet its reckoning, and in the skies above the Marianas, the Hellcat would write its legend. What happened that day would not simply be remembered as a battle. It would be remembered as the moment when Japan's wings were torn from the sky. Only 3 years earlier, the story had been very different. In December 1941, Japanese aircraft had ripped across the skies of Pearl Harbor. The Zero, sleek, fast, impossibly agile, seemed untouchable. It outturned every American plane. It outran them. It climbed faster, struck harder, and terrified anyone who faced it. American pilots called it a phantom, a machine that defied the rules of air combat. At Wake Island, at the Philippines, over the Coral Sea, the Zero carved its legend in fire. For young aviators like David Harrington, those early years were brutal. He remembered his first tour, flying the stubby, underpowered Wildcat. It could fight, but only barely. Against the Zero, every maneuver felt like suicide. You couldn't climb with it. You couldn't turn with it. The only chance was to dive, fire, and pray you escaped. American losses mounted. Not just machines, men. Pilots with only weeks of combat experience were thrown into the sky, and the Zero devoured them. The lesson was clear. If America wanted to survive in the Pacific, it needed more than courage. It needed a weapon. By mid-1942, engineers at Grumman Aircraft had begun sketching a new answer. They listened to combat reports from pilots who had fought and barely survived the Zero. Every weakness was written down. Every strength was studied. The design philosophy was stark. Forget outturning the Zero. Forget lightweight frames. The new fighter would not be a dancer. It would be a brawler. Thus, the Hellcat was born. A machine built like a flying fortress, armored cockpit, self-sealing fuel tanks, and 6 heavy machine guns. It was not delicate. It was not subtle. It was survival on wings. By late 1943, the first Hellcats reached the fleet. Pilots like Harrington knew instantly. This was different. The Wildcat had felt like a compromise. The Hellcat felt like destiny. It climbed with power. It dove like a hawk. It could take punishment and keep flying when a Zero would already be a fireball. And most importantly, it was simple to fly. Even a fresh graduate from flight school could handle it. But machines alone don't win wars. Behind every Hellcat was something greater, the relentless engine of American industry. While Japan struggled to replace even a few dozen planes each month, U.S. factories were building thousands every month. While Japanese flight schools cut training hours down to scraps, American cadets graduated with over 300 hours in the cockpit. The math was merciless. And so by 1944, the balance had shifted. For the first time, the Zero was no longer the hunter, it was the hunted. The stage was set in the Marianas, tiny islands scattered in the Pacific, but priceless in strategic value. Whoever controlled them would hold the key to striking Japan itself. Admiral Raymond Spruance and Admiral Mark Mitcher assembled the might of Task Force 58. 15 carriers, hundreds of ships, nearly 1,000 aircraft, most of them Hellcats. On the other side, Admiral Jisaburo Ozawa prepared his counterstroke. 9 carriers, every pilot Japan could scrape together. Veterans, but also boys barely out of training, some with less than 50 hours of flight time. The difference was stark. One side fought with experience, numbers, and machines built to dominate. The other fought with dwindling hope, fragile aircraft, and a myth that was already fading. Harrington walked the deck on the night of June 18th. The air smelled of gasoline and salt spray. He looked at his Hellcat, tail number 29, and felt a quiet certainty. This was not 1942 anymore. This was a new war, and by sunrise, the Zero's reign would end. The dawn of June 19, 1944 came with a strange electricity. Not fear, not dread. Something else. Like the air itself knew history was about to shift. Aboard the carrier USS Independence, Lieutenant Commander David Harrington tightened the straps of his flight gear. Around him, the deck was alive with motion. Mechanics shouting, handlers pushing fighters into position, ordnance crews hauling belts of ammunition. The sea wind carried the sharp scent of fuel. Every man knew this day would decide the Pacific. At the center of it all stood Captain Walter Green, commander of Air Group 22. Green was a veteran of Midway, a man who had seen friends die in burning Wildcats. His face was weathered, his voice gravel, but his eyes were sharp, alive with a quiet fury. "Gentlemen," he said, pointing at the tactical board, "today is the reckoning. Task Force 58 is spread across 15 miles of ocean. Our battleships guard the line. Our carriers hold the punch. And you? You are the shield. The Japanese will throw everything at us. You will throw it back, hard." Beside Harrington stood his wingman, Lieutenant Samuel Ortiz, barely 20, dark hair, quick grin, nerves of steel. Ortiz had only flown combat twice before, but he carried himself like a man twice his age. "Think they'll come at us all at once?" Ortiz asked. Harrington gave a half smile. "If they're smart, but smart doesn't win wars anymore. Mass does." And mass was what Task Force 58 had in terrifying abundance. 15 fast carriers, 7 battleships, 8 heavy cruisers, dozens of destroyers, and above them, nearly 900 aircraft, most of them Hellcats. Radar screens glowed in the dim light of the Combat Information Center. Reports streamed in, contacts dozens, then scores, then hundreds, a tidal wave of enemy aircraft rising from the west. Admiral Mark Mitcher stood on the bridge of his flagship, the USS Lexington. Tall, calm, expression unreadable. His orders were clipped, precise. Launch combat air patrol. Vector fighters to intercept. Hold the line. Far away across the Philippine Sea, Admiral Jisaburo Ozawa gathered his own storm. 9 carriers, 400 aircraft. But his pilots were not the elite killers of 1941. Many were boys with less than 50 hours in the cockpit. Some were flying machines so fragile, their very skin could ignite under a burst of tracers. Still, they came, driven by duty, driven by desperation, driven by the illusion that the Zero could still rule the sky. Back on the Independence, Harrington mounted the wing of his Hellcat. Tail number 29 gleamed in the early sun. He ran his hand across the riveted skin. This fighter had already saved his life twice. Unlike the Zero, it could take hits and keep flying. Unlike the Zero, it was built not just to kill, but to survive. The deck beneath him trembled as engines roared to life. The first squadron thundered down the catapult, claws of steel leaping into the Pacific sky. More followed, one after another, until the air above the task force filled with dark specks climbing toward the light. Harrington slid into his cockpit, canopy locking shut. The world outside dimmed. Inside, only the hum of instruments and the steady growl of the engine. His squadron commander, Commander Frank Dalton, spoke over the radio. Dalton was a veteran of Guadalcanal, scarred but unshaken. His voice carried the calm weight of a man who had cheated death more than once. Listen up. Intelligence confirms enemy strength over 400 aircraft. 4 waves. Fighters, dive bombers, torpedo planes. They're coming heavy. Remember your training. Boom and zoom. Use your altitude. Never turn with a Zero. Hit hard. Climb away. Live to strike again. Static crackled, then silence. Every pilot felt it. The shift. The moment before battle, when the world seemed to hold its breath. Ortiz's voice cut through. Hey, Skipper, let's bag some meatballs today. His laugh was sharp, fearless. Harrington's reply was steady. Stay on my wing. We'll send them back to the sea. Beyond the horizon, the enemy was already in the air. Zeros, Vals, Kates. Even the new Judy dive bombers. They rose in great dark swarms, their red insignia glinting like blood against the morning sky. The stage was set. 2 forces, one rising, one falling, about to collide in the greatest carrier air battle in history. For Harrington and Ortiz, for Green and Dalton, for every pilot strapping into a Hellcat that morning. This was no longer about survival. It was about supremacy. And in the next few hours, the world would discover who truly owned the skies. The order came at Ordo 8:30. Launch all fighters. The deck crew moved with precision born of endless drills. Hellcats were dragged into position, wings locked, fuel lines detached. The catapult officer raised his hand. Engines thundered. One by one, the blue giants roared forward, wheels leaving steel, rising into the Pacific sky. Lieutenant Commander David Harrington felt the jolt as the catapult flung him forward. Then sudden freedom. The Hellcat leapt into the dawn, its 2,000 horsepower engine pulling him upward with effortless power. Below, the USS Independence shrank into a dot of steel. Above, only sky, limitless, waiting. His wingman, Lieutenant Samuel Ortiz, slid into formation on his right. The 2 Hellcats cut through the morning air, climbing higher and higher until the fleet was only a shadow beneath the clouds. Stay tight, Harrington called. Ortiz's voice came back, sharp, steady. Always. At 15,000 feet, the first reports crackled over the radio. Multiple bogeys, bearing 270, estimate 80 plus, altitude unknown. The words sharpened the air like a blade. Captain Walter Green's voice broke in. All units, intercept. Do not let them through. The horizon began to darken. Shapes appeared, first faint, then countless. A black cloud stretching across the sky. Zeros, dive bombers, torpedo planes, all heading straight for Task Force 58. Contact, Commander Frank Dalton announced, his tone calm, measured, but every pilot could feel the tension coil tight in their chest. The first wave was coming. Harrington banked his Hellcat, positioning above the enemy swarm. Altitude was life. From here, he could dive like a hawk, strike hard, pull away before the Zero could even respond. Remember your training, Dalton's voice steadied them. Boom and zoom. Hit them once, climb away. Don't dogfight. They'll try to drag you into a turn. Don't let them. The Japanese formation spread out below, sunlight glinting off silver wings painted with crimson circles. Some flew tight, disciplined. Others wavered, unsure. Pilots fresh from rush training. Harrington could almost see their faces. Boys, not men. But boys with bombs could still kill. Hammerflight, follow me, Harrington called. He pushed the throttle forward. The Hellcat roared. Gravity pulled him into a dive. The airspeed needle shot past 350 mm. Wind screamed against the canopy. At 1,000 yards, he locked onto a zero. The pilot never saw him coming. Harrington squeezed the trigger. 650 caliber guns erupted. Tracers lit the sky like molten fire. The Zero's fragile skin tore apart. They burst into the cockpit. Flame, smoke, silence. The aircraft disintegrated in midair. Splash one, Harrington called, pulling back into a climb. Ortiz's voice followed. Got one! Judy bomber! Going down! Harrington glanced sideways. Ortiz's Hellcat trailing smoke from its guns. The Japanese dive bomber spiraling into the sea. The battle erupted across 30 miles of sky. Hellcats slashed through formations, striking from above, then climbing away. Zeros twisted desperately, trying to force turning fights, but the Hellcat was too fast, too strong. Ortiz found himself targeted by two Zeros. They dove at him, guns flashing. "Skipper, I've got trouble!" he shouted. Harrington rolled hard, dropping in from above. His burst caught one Zero in the engine. Explosion. Black smoke. The second broke away, but Ortiz was already climbing, safe again. Everywhere fire bloomed in the sky. Bombers fell in flames. Torpedo planes disintegrated before they could even line up a run. The ocean below churned with wreckage. Burning fuel, broken wings, men bailing out into waves already slick with oil. For the Japanese, the attack became chaos. Pilots screamed into radios, trying to regroup. But the American defense was disciplined, relentless. One division attacked, another climbed to cover, and fresh squadrons rotated in like clockwork. Harrington spotted a lone Zero pulling into a vertical climb. Aggressive, skilled. This was no green recruit. The pilot twisted sharply, forcing a duel. For a moment, Harrington felt the danger. The Zero turned tighter, circling like a blade. But Harrington remembered Dalton's words. Don't turn. Climb. He pulled back, letting the Hellcat's power drag him higher. The Zero tried to follow, but its climb faltered. That was the moment. Harrington rolled inverted, dropped into a split S, and came down behind him. A short burst, fire tore through the fuselage. The Zero became a falling comet, vanishing into the sea. Splash another, Harrington breathed. By 10:30, the first Japanese wave was shattered. Dozens of aircraft fell burning into the ocean. Fewer than 10 even reached the American fleet, and none survived the gauntlet of anti-aircraft fire waiting for them. The radio crackled. All units, new contacts, larger formation inbound, estimated 120 aircraft, bearing 280. Harrington looked at his fuel gauge, still strong. He checked his ammunition, over 1,000 rounds left. Enough. Ortiz came back on the line, breathing heavy, voice tight with adrenaline. You ready for round two, Skipper? Harrington adjusted his gloves. His answer was calm. Always. The sky to the west began to darken again. More shadows rising, more planes. Another storm. And Task Force 58 rose to meet it. The second wave came like a storm. 120 Japanese aircraft, fighters, dive bombers, torpedo planes, sweeping in a black tide across the Pacific sky. For a moment, it looked endless. Harrington tightened his grip on the stick. Here they come. Ortiz's voice cracked through the radio, raw with adrenaline. Skipper, That's a whole damn Air Force, Harrington answered with steel. Then let's bury it. The Hellcats dove again. 36 blue fighters slicing through the morning sun, guns flashing, tracers ripping the air. The Japanese formation buckled on contact. Green pilots broke formation, panicking. Veterans tried to hold discipline, tried to form a shield, but the Hellcats smashed through like thunderbolts. Harrington lined up a Val dive bomber, its bombs slung beneath the fuselage. One burst. Flames engulfed it. The bomb detonated mid-air, scattering fire across the sky. "Splash one Val," Harrington called. Ortiz's voice shouted over the static. "Got another Judy, she's down." But danger was everywhere. Zeros swarmed in from above, trying to pin the Hellcats in turning fights. One latched onto Harrington's tail. Gunfire stitched across his wing. The Hellcat shuddered. He rolled hard left, dove straight down. The Zero followed. Too close, too eager. At 5,000 feet, Harrington snapped into a climbing turn, the Hellcat's powerful engine dragging him upward. The Zero tried to match him and stalled. Harrington reversed, came down like a hammer, guns blazing. The Zero erupted in fire. "Splash another," he muttered, sweat pouring down his face. All across the sky, the same story played out. Hellcats using altitude, speed, and firepower to shred the enemy. Zeros twisted, turned, clawed for advantage, but they could not win. Not anymore. Captain Walter Green's squadron intercepted the torpedo bombers. The Nakajima B-5ENs, the same aircraft that had gutted Pearl Harbor, were crawling toward the fleet at barely 200 miles per hour. Against Hellcats, it was slaughter. Green himself destroyed 2 in a single pass. Others followed until the ocean was dotted with wreckage. Still, the Japanese pressed on. Wave after wave. By noon, the third assault was spotted. Another 80 planes. "Good God," Ortiz whispered. Harrington steadied him. "They're throwing everything. This is it. Their last strength." The Hellcats rose again. Fresh squadrons launched as others landed to refuel. The rotation was seamless, endless. Where one flight ended, another began. The third wave was even younger. Pilots barely out of school. Some so green they could barely hold formation. And yet, they came. Harrington dove on a Judy bomber, ripped its engine apart. The pilot bailed, parachute opening, drifting helplessly into the sea. Below, Ortiz destroyed a Zero with a single clean burst. The radio was alive with voices. "Splash one! Got another, Val! They're falling like flies!" The sky itself seemed on fire. Smoke trails crisscrossed the heavens. Aircraft spiraled into the sea, exploding into walls of flame. The Pacific became a graveyard of burning wings. At 13:15, radar picked up a fourth wave. Smaller, 50 aircraft. But these were not elite squadrons. These were scraps. Training planes, obsolete Claudes, anything that could fly. Dalton's voice cut across the channel. "Gentlemen, finish it." The fourth wave barely reached the Americans. Hellcats tore them apart with ruthless efficiency. Old Claudes burned in seconds. Twin-engine bombers lumbered forward, only to be ripped to shreds. By the time the wave collapsed, the Japanese had nothing left. And then, silence. Harrington leveled out at 12,000 feet, scanning the horizon. The once crowded sky was empty. No more swarms. Only smoke. Only wreckage. Ortiz's voice broke through, quieter now. "Skipper, how many do you think we got?" Harrington exhaled slowly. "Too many to count." Below, the ocean boiled with debris. Burning oil slicks stretched for miles. Life rafts bobbed among the wreckage. Japanese pilots clinging desperately to survival. But the battle was decided. Their air arm was gone. By mid-afternoon, the tally was staggering. Nearly 400 Japanese aircraft destroyed. American losses, fewer than 30. It was not just victory, it was annihilation. Harrington looked at the smoke curling into the sky and knew this was the breaking point. The moment when the Zero, once feared, once legendary, died. The myth had burned away, and the Hellcat had claimed the sky. By late afternoon, the sky was quiet. No more black swarms, no more burning arcs of falling planes. Only smoke, only silence. Lieutenant Commander David Harrington guided his Hellcat back toward Task Force 58. The battle had lasted hours, but to him, it felt like a single breath held too long. He glanced at his instruments. Fuel low, ammunition nearly gone, hands trembling on the stick. "Independence, this is Harrington, returning to base." The reply came calm, steady. "Copy, Harrington. You are cleared to land." He brought the Hellcat down onto the rolling deck. The arrestor hook caught. The fighter slammed to a halt. Engines cut. For a moment, he just sat there, sweat dripping, heart hammering, alive. On the flight deck, the air was electric. Pilots climbed from cockpits, some grinning, some dazed, some so exhausted they could barely walk. The smell of gunpowder still clung to their uniforms. Ground crews swarmed the aircraft, patching holes, checking fuel, rearming guns. The battle wasn't just won, it was survived. Ortiz staggered over, helmet tucked under his arm. "Skipper," he said, still catching his breath, "I can't even count how many went down today." Harrington looked out toward the horizon. Oil slicks glimmered where aircraft had vanished. "Neither can I," he said softly, "but I know what it means." That night, on the carrier's mess deck, the mood was surreal, not grim, not heavy, almost celebratory. Men laughed, traded stories, voices buzzing like a carnival. Pilots recounted kills with hands cutting the air, reliving dives, gun passes, explosions. But beneath the noise, there was something unspoken. Every man knew how close it had been, how easily the tide of battle could have shifted, if not for the Hellcat, if not for the training, if not for the sheer weight of American industry behind them. Captain Walter Green addressed the squadron late that evening. His voice carried over the hum of the engines and the distant crash of waves. "Gentlemen," he said, "today we destroyed Japanese carrier aviation. Not weakened, not bruised, destroyed." He paused. 400 enemy aircraft, nearly all gone, and we lost less than 30. The room fell silent. Numbers had a way of cutting deeper than words. Harrington thought back to 1942, back to Pearl Harbor, back to the helpless feeling of flying a Wildcat against a Zero that could twist around him like smoke. 2 years ago, it had been despair. Now, supremacy. He leaned against the rail that night, staring at the endless Pacific. Fires still burned faintly on the horizon. Somewhere out there, survivors floated in the wreckage. Young Japanese pilots, boys really, who had never stood a chance. For Harrington, the victory was sharp but not sweet. "We broke them today," he whispered, "and they'll never recover." The truth was undeniable. Japan had lost more than planes. It had lost the irreplaceable, the veteran air crews, the elite who had carried its empire across the Pacific. Replacements would come, but they would be children with 50 hours in the cockpit, flying obsolete machines into the teeth of Hellcats. Meanwhile, American factories churned. 2,000 aircraft a month, new squadrons graduating every week. Each pilot trained, equipped, prepared. The machine of war was unstoppable now. By midnight, the tally was official. Nearly 395 Japanese aircraft destroyed. American losses, 29 planes. The kill ratio, better than 14-1. It was more than numbers. It was a turning point. The men of Task Force 58 would never again fear the Zero. From this day forward, the Pacific was theirs. The morning after, the Pacific was still, No swarms of Zeros, no black columns of smoke clawing into the sky, only the quiet hum of carriers moving steadily west. But for history, nothing would ever be the same. On June 19, 1944, Japanese naval aviation died, not with a whisper, not in retreat, but in fire, in smoke, in silence. Nearly 400 aircraft lost in a single day, veteran pilots gone, decades of experience gone, a force that had once terrorized the Pacific, shattered forever. For the men of Task Force 58, the meaning was clear. From now on, American carriers would sail where they wished, strike when they wished. The sky was theirs. The Hellcat had done more than win a battle. It had ended an era. Fast, heavily armed, forgiving in the hands of a rookie, deadly in the hands of a veteran. By war's end, it would account for more than 5,000 enemy aircraft destroyed. Its kill ratio, 19-1, remains one of the greatest in aviation history. But numbers tell only part of the story. The real legacy was in what the Hellcat represented. It was not a miracle plane. It was not untouchable. What it was proof. Proof that industrial might, training, and adaptation could overcome myth. Proof that lessons written in blood at Pearl Harbor and Coral Sea had not been wasted. Proof that America had found its rhythm of war. While Japan clung to a shrinking cadre of elite pilots, America built thousands. While Japan produced a few hundred planes a month, America produced thousands. The balance was not just tilted, it was crushed. Lieutenant Commander David Harrington never forgot that day. Not the roar of the engine, not the flash of tracers, not the sight of young Japanese pilots falling into the sea. He remembered standing on the deck that evening, watching the sunset paint the Pacific in blood-red light. The Hellcats lined up along the carrier, wings folded like silent guardians. The men around him laughing, alive, victorious. And yet, beneath it all, a heaviness. Because Harrington knew what many did not say out loud. That those Japanese boys had fought bravely. That they had died believing they could change the tide, and that their commanders had thrown them into hopeless battle. The legacy of the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot was not just victory, it was warning. War was no longer about the few. It was no longer about aces. It was about systems, about machines, about nations that could outbuild, outtrain, and outlast their enemies. And America had become that nation. In the years to come, historians would mark June 19th as the day the Pacific skies changed forever. The day Japanese naval aviation ceased to exist as a fighting force. The day the Hellcat became legend. For Harrington, Ortiz, Green, Dalton, and the thousands who flew and fought, it was the day they proved something more than courage. They proved supremacy. From that day until the war's end, American carriers struck wherever they pleased. Saipan, Guam, Tinian, Iwo Jima, Okinawa, all under the shadow of Hellcat wings. 3 months later, Tokyo itself trembled beneath American bombs. And when the war finally ended, it was Hellcats that circled above Tokyo Bay, guarding the surrender ceremony aboard the USS Missouri. The Zero was gone. Its reign, its legend, its terror, ended, and the Hellcat remained. Symbol of an empire of steel, symbol of a nation that had turned the tide, symbol of the day when the sky itself declared, the age of the Zero is over. The future belongs to the Hellcat. The past is not silent. The Great Marianas Turkey Shoot was more than a victory. It was the moment the sky itself was decided. But this was only one chapter. The Pacific still burned, and the war was far from over. If you found this story compelling, join us again. There are more battles, more machines, more forgotten voices waiting to be heard. Subscribe to Warline Archives and step with us into the shadows of history, because the past is not silent, it still speaks. And we will tell its story.